All right, you guys. Not sure exactly what happened. Spreaker crashed on me, but we're back up again. Believe we should be live one more time and just continuing on. So, Dorian, back up about a paragraph or two.
Okay.
And
yep.
Start again. Y'all let me know you're hearing me, if you will.
Okay. Well, we were talking about the fear that these people begin to have to live with every night of their lives. What had been a pleasant countryside, you saw the pictures, the little houses, what had been a peaceful area was turning into something altogether different, and it was a terrorizing type of situation, as we're going to see. It's going to get worse.
Quit, and I tried to come back home. And it should
Are we on?
Right now. Hang on. Hold on. Hey, Dorian.
Yeah.
Mike just got through saying that nothing's coming through, and I'm getting that we're still not live. Mike, you can hear me, right?
Yeah, there's a third one now. Yeah, what happened?
I'm not sure. Everything shows to be working.
Okay, continue the show then.
Okay, but we're not live. Nobody's hearing me out there either.
Okay, just shut it down then.
Okay. All right.
All
right, brother.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Well, you still there, Dennis?
I am, yes.
Wow.
Let's see here. All right. Now I believe that they hear us again.
Really?
Yeah. Steve Adams, give me just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 if you're hearing me. Let's see if they're getting it. All right. Steve Adams, Scotty D, somebody type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, they're hearing us. Okay. So
okay.
Y'all, I apologize. Don't know what happened to Spreaker. It just died on us. So we're going to back up 2.5 paragraphs for y'all. Sorry about that. So go ahead, Dorian. Talking about them being fearful.
Yeah, we were talking about how that what had been a peaceful, very attractive, not rich, but still people were not starving or anything. They were getting by okay on their farms. And then suddenly the whole situation begins to change. And now it's come to the point where they live in fear every night of a raid. Well, we're about to see one happen here. An aged man by the name of Blythe, B-L-Y-T-H-E, believing his own house to be his own, fed all whom he pleased to feed, and sheltered all whom it pleased him to shelter. Among many of his warm personal friends was Cole Younger. Now, you guys remember that Cole Younger would later be famous as part of the alleged James gang. And Cole Younger was riding with Quantrill before Jesse James and Frank ever joined the outfit. So, old man Blythe had a friend in Cole Younger. And the colonel commanding the fort at Independence sent a scout one day to find Younger. Now, when he says send a scout, that doesn't mean a single cavalryman. That means a patrol. That's probably what we're more used to hearing from the cavalry movies, would be a patrol. A small group led by usually a lieutenant. So they sent out a scout one day to find Younger and to make the country people tell where he might be found. Well, old man Blythe was not at home, but his son was. A fearless lad of 12 years. He's only 12 years old. He was taken to the barn and ordered to confess everything he knew of Quantrill Younger and their whereabouts. Now, why was he taken to the barn? Because you can throw ropes over beams and you can pull things up. So they probably put ropes around his thumbs or his wrists at the very least, and pulled him off the ground to intimidate him. And they thought they could quickly get him to reveal the information they needed. Imagine some of you out there, you have 12-year-olds. Imagine men like this doing this to your 12-year-old. How would you feel inside? What would you do about it? And it gets worse.
Thing, I'd kill them if I could.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're seeing in detail the process that's taking place in along the Kansas-Missouri border. All right, so he's ordered to confess everything he knew of Quantrill, Younger, and their whereabouts. And he was told if he failed to speak truly, he was going to be killed. And this boy, this 12-year-old boy, in no manner frightened, kept them some moments in conversation, waiting for an opportunity to escape. Smart kid. This kid had potential. Seeing at last what he imagined to be a chance, he dashed away from his captors and entered the house under a perfect shower of balls. There, seizing a pistol and rushing to the back door towards some timber, a ball struck him in the spine just as he reached the garden fence, and he fell back dying. But splendid in his boyish courage to the last, turning over on his face as the Jayhawkers rushed up to finish him, he shot one dead, mortally wounded another, and severely wounded the third. And before he could shoot a fourth time, 17 bullets were put into his body. It seemed as if God's vengeance was especially exercised in the righting of this terrible wrong. Actually, you could never right it, but you certainly could engage in retribution. An old black man who had happened to be at Blythe's house at the time was a witness to the bloody deed, and afraid of his own life, ran hurriedly into the brush. There he came unexpectedly upon Younger, Quantrill, Howler, Todd, and 11 of his men. Noticing the great excitement under which the black man labored, they forced him to tell them the whole story. There was yet time to set up an ambush. On the road back to Independence, now listen to this. Here's an X marks the spot lead, everybody. It was yet time for an ambuscade. On the road back to Independence was a pass between two embankments known as the Blue Cut. In width, it was about 50 yards, and the height of each embankment was about 30 feet. Quantrill dismounted his men, stationed some at each end of the passageway and some at the top on either side. Not a shot was to be fired until the returning Federals had entered it front and rear. From the Blue Cut, this fatal spot was afterwards known as the slaughter pen. Of the 38 Federals sent out after Cole Younger, and who, because they could not find him, had brutally murdered an innocent boy, 17 were killed, while 5, not too badly shot to be able to ride, barely managed to escape into Independence, the avenging guerrillas hard upon their heels. So, we see how quickly did they set an ambush, but you see how they did it? If you were to follow these roads, if you were to first research, I'm looking at a deer just walked up right outside my window here and looking at me. All right, anyway, if you were to follow up on your research, get a map, find where the old roads ran, and a lot of times they ran a few yards away from the existing roads today. And the old roads are usually sunken roads. especially if there's any kind of hilly territory. If it's not totally flat, you get into hills, up and down hills, you'll find where the road cuts are, the old roads, because every time the road got churned up by traffic when it was muddy, they would take their horse-drawn scrapers and they would scrape the mud out of it, and so it would make the road deeper, but it would give it a firm bottom once again. So anyway, sometimes these sunken roads they started at the surface and ended up 6 or 8 feet deep. Been on many of those in my detecting adventures. Okay, so look at this perfect place. If you drove these roads with keeping in mind, where the old roads ran, especially in winter's a good time when the leaves are off the trees because you can see so much better. You can see features. Ask yourself, think like a guerrilla. Where would I set an ambush for a unit of Yankee soldiers, that are passing down the road? Where's the best place to set an ambush? Well, probably in the entire scope of the several years of war, every place that would have been good for ambush got used at some time in the war. So, I'm just saying that's a way you can use probabilities rather than X marks the spot, maps or even research. When you don't have, you can't go to the ORs and get detailed reports on all these little fights. You take leads like this, and then, like I said, you pick up on patterns. That's what a history detective does. He doesn't say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to go to the blue cut, and I'm going to hunt that because they had a fight there, and then I'm going home." No, the history detective is going to say, "Okay, if they picked the blue cut for an ambush, where else around here would they have picked for an ambush?" And start hunting the likely places. And some of them you're going to zero out on that they weren't used, and others you're going to score. You're going to hit places where battles took place, and you're going to find artifacts because you thought out of the box and you did something that the other detectors aren't doing for the most part. You see. All right, now we're going to get into what is the 6th chapter in the book, and it's called the Low House Fight, or battle as we would think of it today. So it says the next rendezvous was at Reuben Harris's, 10 miles south of Independence. And there all the command went, splendidly mounted again. Remember, they were on foot. They'd lost their horses. So they've remounted. I'm sure stolen horses from farmers that were pro-Northern or Union. And they remounted, and they're eager to get back into action. And it says some days of preparation were necessary. So Richard Hall, a fighting blacksmith who shot as well as he shod and knew a trail as thoroughly as a piece of steel, had need to exercise much of his handiwork in order to make the horses good for cavalry. Do you know what they had to do to those horses? A lot of people don't know there were 2 basic kinds of horseshoes. There were the horseshoes for the farm horses and the people's horses, that they used to ride and pull their carriages and things, wagons. And they have at the at the 2 ends, that the open end of the horseshoe, there will be what's called a cleat. It's a piece of iron that turns down at a right angle to help the horse, get traction, apparently. But a cavalry horseshoe does not have that cleat. And so when you dig horseshoes in Civil War areas, you can tell a lot of times whether or not it was a horseshoe from a local farmer that owns the property that got lost in the early 1900s, or whether it was a shoe thrown by a cavalry horse during a Civil War battle there, by looking to see if it's got cleats on the ends or not. So anyway, these are things, that have to be taken into account. So they got a fighting blacksmith in their group, and his skills were very much needed in order to mount them well. And good mounts and good horses were going to be an absolute key to most of the battles that Quantrill and his men would fight over the next several years. But they had another problem. There were several rounds of cartridges to make. A round, I'm not sure exactly what he refers to. I know the average cartridge box, the soldiers in the war carried 40 cartridges. Now, I don't know about the guerrillas. You've got 6 pistols, so how many cartridges do you need to carry for reloads? Every time you reload, you're going to use 36 cartridges, so they probably carried 100 cartridges at least. If not on their persons, of course, in their saddlebag, because it would be extra weight. So they had to make their own cartridges. A guerrilla knew nothing whatever of an ordnance master. His laboratory was in his luck. If a capture did not bring him percussion caps, he had to fall back on deception or strategy or blockade running square out. Powder and lead in the raw were enough, for if with these he could not make himself presentable in inspection. Now what does that mean? That means if he couldn't make his own cartridges and show that he had a full load of cartridges, whatever they decided it was, maybe we'll find out as we go on through the book, then he wasn't fit to be, he had no calling as a fighter in the brush, is the way Trow put it. So anyway, it was Quantrill's intention at this time to attack Harrisonville. Now, I've got a picture of downtown Harrisonville as it is today. Could not find any historic pictures in the time I had. This is picture number 8, if you want to look at that. The buildings look like some of them could have dated back to the Civil War. But obviously there's cars in the picture, so it's a modern picture. So Quantrill's going to plan an attack on Harrisonville. Lost my place. Hang on a second. County seat of Cass County. Okay, now we're in another county. And he's going to capture it if possible. So with this object in view, and after every preparation was made for a vigorous campaign, he moved 8 miles east of Independence, camping near the Little Blue in the vicinity of, excuse me, pardon me, I went to get a drink of water here.
You all right,
so
brother?
Yep.
Okay. I know CPR, but it's hard to do 700 miles away. Okay. Well, does this stand for critical prayer response, Dennis? There you go. Yes, sir. That's about it.
That you can do from a lot of miles away.
I can, brother.
Okay. So anyway, here we go. Camping near the Little Blue in the vicinity of Job Crabtree's. See, you can check old land records in the county seat if they survived, if they didn't burn during the war, and you might find exactly where Job Crabtree lived. And that would give you narrow down the area where they camped on the Little Blue. It says he always camped near or in a house, and for this he had 2 reasons. First, that its occupants might gather up for him all the news possible, and second, that in the event of a surprise, a sure rallying point would always be at hand. He had a theory, this is Quantrill, that after a guerrilla was given time to get over the first effects of a sudden charge or ambush, the very nature of his military status made him invincible, that after an opportunity was afforded him to think, a surrender was next to impossible. So he said, before there was time, Trow says, before there was time to attack Harrisonville, a scout reported Peabody again on the warpath, this time bent on an utter extermination of the guerrillas, and he very nearly kept his word. From Job Crabtree's, Quantrill had moved to an unoccupied house known as the Low House. That's not L-O-W-E, that's L-O-W, as in something that's not high, it's low. And then from this house, he'd gone into some timber, and I'll have to say this for Harrison Troe. He had a great vocabulary. He says contiguous timber. Do you know what contiguous means? It means adjacent. Adjacent, nearby timber. To bivouac for the night. About 10 o'clock, the day suddenly became overcast, and a fresh wind blew from the east, and rain fell in torrents. So back to the house they went, and the horses were hitched along the fence in the rear of it, and the door on the south side, the only door having a bar across it in lieu of a sentinel. Such soldiering was perfectly inexcusable, and it taught Quantrill a lesson to remember until the day of his death. In the morning preceding the day of the attack, Lieutenant Nash of Peabody's regiment, okay, so we know he's a regimental commander, and probably a colonel rather than a general. Okay, so Lieutenant Nash, commanding 200 men, had found Quantrill's trail, but lost it later on, and then found it again just about sunset. So he was informed of Quantrill's having gone from the low house to the brush, and of his having come back to it when the rain began falling heavily, so somebody was watching him. There was a spy in the woods, a scout, unknown to Quantrill and his men. To a certain extent, this seeking shelter was a necessity on the part of Quantrill. The men had no cartridge boxes, and not all of them had overcoats. If once their ammunition were damaged, it would be as though sheep should attack wolves. Nash, supplied with everything needed for the weather, raincoats, the whole works, weatherproof cartridge boxes, waited patiently for the guerrillas to become snugly settled under shelter, and then surrounded the house. Excuse me. So for the third time, Quantrill's got himself in another fix, a bad fix with his men. And before a gun was fired, the Federals had every horse belonging to the guerrillas. Wow. See, they really got, the old saying goes, they got caught with their pants down. Had Quantrill kept doing this kind of thing, he would not have survived the war at all, nor would his men. But they're learning. So they're bringing, the Yankees are bringing every available carbine in command. They're bringing it to bear on that only door. And it says, at first all was confusion. Across the logs that once supported an upper floor, some boards had been laid, and sleeping on them were Todd Blunt and William Carr. Favored by the almost impenetrable darkness, Quantrill determined upon immediate abandonment of the house. He called loudly twice for all to follow him and dashed through the door under a galling fire. Those in the loft did not hear him, and they maintained in reply to the Federal volleys a lively fusillade. Then Cole Younger, James Little, Joseph Gilchrist, and a young Irish boy, a brave new recruit, turned back to help their comrades. The house became a furnace. This doesn't mean it was set on fire. It means the amount of firing from guns going on was so intense. At each of the two corners on the south side, 4 men fought, Younger calling on Todd in the intervals of every volley to come out of the loft and come to the brush. They started at last. It was 400 yards to the nearest shelter. That's the length of a football field plus another. I'm sorry. The football field is 100 yards, 300 feet. So they've got almost a quarter mile to get to the nearest cover. And the ground was very muddy. Gilchrist was shot down. The Irish boy was killed. Blunt was wounded and captured. Carr surrendered. Younger had his hat shot away. Little was unhurt, and Todd, scratched in 4 places, finally got to safely to the timber. But it was a miracle. 20 Federals singled him out as well as they could in the darkness and kept close at his heels, firing whenever a gun was loaded. Todd had a musket which, when it seemed as if they were all upon him at once, he would point at the nearest and make pretense of shooting. This is probably something that was in the house and he grabbed, not that he fought with a musket regularly. He just grabbed it, when he ran out. Anyway, when they halted and dodged about to get out of range, he would dash away again. So he'd point the gun at him, and they would take cover, and then he would start running, and then they would have to chase him again. So he was buying time, and he would dash away, gaining what space he could until he had to turn and reenact the same unpleasant pantomime. Reaching the woods at last, he fired point blank, and in reality now, killing with a single discharge 1 pursuer and wounding 4. Man, it sounds more like a shotgun than a musket. Part of Nash's command was still on the track of Quantrill, but after losing 5 killed and a number wounded, they returned again to the house, but returned too late for the continued battle. The dead and 2 prisoners were all that were left for them. So the Little Blue River, and there's a picture of it in the supplemental photos in part 2, if you want to go back and check that out. The Little Blue River was bank full, and the country was swarming with militia. For the 3rd time, Quantrill was afoot, with unrelenting pursuers upon his trail in every direction. To get out of a fix like this even once, and now look at this. This is the 3rd time that they had to make a desperate escape, and they paid for it this time. They took casualties. He knew at daylight that Nash would be after him again, river or no river. He must get over if they were going to have a chance, to escape capture and death. So the rain was still pouring down. So it says that muddy, forlorn, and well nigh worn out, yet not demoralized, they reached the Little Blue River, and just as they got there, he saw on the other bank Toller, one of his own soldiers, sitting in a canoe. Thenceforward, or from that time forward, the work of crossing was easy, and Nash, coming on an hour afterwards, received a volley at the ford where he expected to find a lot of helpless and unresisting men. The fight at the Low House occurred the first week in May 1862 and caused the expedition against Harrisonville to be abandoned. So 3 times surprised and 3 times losing all horses, saddles, and bridles, it became necessary again to disband the guerrillas, just like they did the other 2 times. So they were dismissed for 30 days with orders to remount themselves, while Quantrill, taking Todd into his confidence and acquainting him fully with his plans, started in his company for Hannibal, Missouri. Mark Twain's hometown on the Mississippi River, I believe.
Yes.
It had become urgently necessary to replenish the supply of revolver caps, that is, percussion caps that go over the little nipples that provide fire to the chamber and ignite the powder behind the bullet. So they couldn't go to Kansas City, where they would ordinarily have gone to replace these, because of all the militia swarming around. They couldn't go that direction. And they had not captured very many supplies in this regard